Hello and welcome to the Honest Not Perfect podcast. My name is Suzanne Ellingham and I'm the director of Source Events, the platform that helps connect retailers, brands and wholesalers to manufacturers and makers globally.
And my name is Jack Stratton. I'm director of Insider Trends. We are a global retail trend spotting agency helping brands to spot what's coming next.
Hi, welcome to this episode of Honest Not Perfect. Today I'm joined by Jack Stratton, Head of Trends at Insider Trends, and also we're delighted to be joined by Claire Bevan, who's the Head of Retail for the Natural History Museum, which is hands down one of my favourite museum shops. So I'm going to be getting quite nosy about all things sustainability. I know, Jack, you're quite interested in the experience side. But in terms of Claire joined the Natural History Museum about 8 years ago after a stint at Waterstones. And it's fair to say she loves the museum sector. And you can tell from the retail at Natural History Museum that it is curated by somebody who enjoys that sector. She's also the leader of the Heritage Sustainability Group, which we're going to talk about a little bit more later on. But it's a fantastic initiative. And I think there's a lot of things there that other retailers may be able to take or certainly learn from. So Claire, back to you. As I mentioned, you've had an interesting journey. I'd be really curious to find out, and I'm always curious when we speak to people like yourself, how did you end up? What was your journey like from Waterstones, even the first time, to coming back into the museum sector and obviously landing at the Natural History Museum?
Well, yeah, lovely to be here as well. So thank you so much for inviting me. In terms of my role at Waterstones, so at Waterstones I started as a Christmas seasonal retail assistant. I'd actually just come out of law school, and I was, but decided not to go in that career. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, to be honest. I'd love to say that I had some grand plan to get into retail and be head of retail at the museum. I did not. I started as a season, and I just fell in love with retail. I mean, I already love books, so obviously Waterstones was natural for me, and yeah, I absolutely loved retail. And so I started in Bristol in their Cribs Causeway store, and then worked my way up to store manager. And then I sort of had a pause of thinking, oh, I'd love this, but hadn't thought of it as a career. So I thought, oh God, do I need to try a proper job for a little bit? That's essentially what I thought. So I thought, well, I'll go to the civil service for a bit. So I did.
Bit of a jump.
Exactly. So I thought, yeah, exactly. Mum and Dad, what you really is retail the career, or what's actually going on? I was like, okay.
What are you doing with your law degree?
Exactly that. So I went into the civil service at DEFRA, which is also brilliant. So I actually worked on a Future of Farming initiative when I was there. So it was about getting young people into farming. So working with this big stakeholder group on farming policy. It was really interesting. Learned lots of things. Got to visit the Happy Hens farm. Have you ever seen those eggs? Happy
no, I
hens?
have. They're the ones with the yellow boxes.
Yeah. I can tell you they are happy hens. I've visited
really
them.
Nice to know.
Yeah, they really are. It's really true.
I believe the marketing for it. I've always hoped they were actually happy.
No,
I
they
always
are.
have my doubts, so I'm glad.
No, brilliant. I met this woman who looked after them. She was hen mad. She practically knew all their names. So yeah, that was really brilliant. So I worked for DEFRA for a bit, and then actually just realised while I was there, it was retail I loved. I did want that career. It wasn't just something I fell into. I was doing without being planned. I actually loved it. So yeah, I worked for Waterstones actually again for a bit on their cafe programme, which you would probably be familiar with. Waterstones cafes are really brilliant. And then a job, the Natural History Museum. So that was just kind of a dream for me. I'd always gone to the Natural History Museum as a child to have a job there. And now obviously I had all the skills in retail, so I could, go for that retail job. And that's how I ended up at the Natural History Museum, which felt to me as someone who's been desperate to come to London for years. I managed, working in London for Waterstones, and then suddenly to be able to do this. So couldn't have felt luckier to get that job.
With you've got that direct comparison of, Waterstones isn't necessarily, the same as all kind of classic high street concepts, but, we think of it very much as like a high street retailer. This is a big question, but I mean, even if it's just a snapshot, what for you are some of the biggest differences between, heading up retail store decision making at somewhere like Waterstones and actually doing it within a cultural institution?
I think probably one of the biggest differences is just the vast amount of priorities that a heritage organisation has as opposed to a high street retailer like Waterstones. So Waterstones did have a lot of passion for its customers, and it did have it was really invested in its customers having a really good experience and creating welcome. So a lot of that was actually quite similar. As you say, Waterstones maybe doesn't have a very very kind of generic concept as a high street. It does have a really identity as somewhere quite welcoming and like a really trusted brand. And somewhere that really cares about reading and getting children into reading. So all those kind of that great stuff Waterstones does kind of translated. But the museum then it does have profit obviously as its driver, as most high street retailers will. And the museum has 1,000 different priorities. It's got 300 scientists working for it doing actual science. It's got a building to maintain. It's got a huge amount of priorities around schools and education. So it's got so many different priorities that commercial is kind of one part of that. So I think that was the biggest difference. You don't have everyone's expertise in the organisation kind of, which is all looking at retail and looking at commercials. You've got your team and you're representing that commercial discipline within a much broader set of priorities and people.
Do you have? I'm always interested in this. Is there sometimes a tension within just kind of focusing on retail and selling and the commercial side within cultural institutions that ultimately pride themselves so much on offering amazing free experiences for anyone in the world? I say this because I did a master's in history a long way back, and like you, there's no relationship between what I do now and what I studied. But I always remember, even from some of those lecturers, I remember some of them would they had their books that they'd written. And, you'd have to read them as part of the syllabus. But they were really almost uncomfortable about selling them. You know how those kinds of people are so passionate about, about heritage and cultural institutions.
It's like money is the dirty word. And
absolutely.
Profit is the dirty word.
And I get it. I completely get it. It's actually a really lovely thing in some ways, but they're really uncomfortable. How does that play out? Do you have sometimes some challenges around that, or do you find that actually, people are just totally on board because they totally get it? Retail can really support everything and does really support everything, and actually the more you sell, the better the museum does.
I think probably it's somewhere in between those two attitudes. I think when it's done really well, I think the organisation can start to trust it, because when you do it when you're looking at kind of the brand of the Natural History Museum, all the things it does and representing it as an organisation, and you're balancing that off with the commercial aspects of it, and teams essentially can see you're doing that, and you're not just nakedly trying to sell anything to make a profit, things that aren't of good quality, that have no relevance to the museum, aren't kind of furthering the aims of education or inspiration from the collections or people's visit people's visit they've had on that day. I think then you lose the trust of the organisation, and that's when you get more of an attitude of commercial is kind of a bit more of a dirty word. It's not actually enhancing this experience here. It's not really adding to the visitor's experience or our brand. It's actually just detracting from it because it doesn't feel connected. So I think that attitude was I think when I started, not necessarily just the museum, but I think in the sector that was maybe a bit more prevalent, and then over the years I really felt that change. And in my organisation particularly, working with the teams across the museum, you do get a lot of support, and you just have to kind of build those relationships and build that trust to kind of be able to get there. And once you start accessing the support, that's where you can really connect what you're doing with the rest of the museum. You get the library team, more about the archives, the scientists are feeding into, has a dinosaur got the right amount of feathers on it, so it's, you really start to connect with those other teams and what the museum's trying to do.
Yeah, and it kind of, I suppose in a way, a little bit like Waterstones, a lot of where that tension exists, it's probably actually a really positive force, because ultimately it just means, well, your retail experience has to be great, not just to make money, but to have a home within this environment that isn't about being commercial otherwise, right? And because I think with Waterstones even, there's something a bit bigger going on there than just selling stuff, right? You're trying to kind of build a love for books, a love for reading, which we all feel is a really positive thing, which, and let's face it, much of retail isn't necessarily like that. It really is just selling stuff. So I guess some of that pressure probably forces you to make sure that, the experience that everyone has coming through the gift shop is really, really great, and that it matters, because they've just had this great experience in the museum, and this has got to live up to it as well.
I absolutely agree, and I think the fact that that tension exists and that is in most heritage organisations is of massive benefit. Because I think in the last few years, I don't know if you agree, I think customers are looking for authenticity. They're looking for brands they trust. They're looking for retail that's linked to experience. And museums and heritage organisations have been doing that for such a long time, for a really long time. And I think getting better and better over the years, like all organisations. And we see customers turning more and more to that now because they can have that experience linked to a retail experience and then take a product home which is which gives them the inspiration and kind of carries that journey on home, for their child or for them. So I think that, and we've seen, our retail, we've seen growth like year on year, which hasn't always been the case for high street retailers recently. But I think heritage is seeing a different picture in some cases because they kind of have that tension, which has forced them to be a bit of a force for good as well as, needing to make a profit for their organisation.
Yeah, it has to be good.
Yeah.
And I think Suze will have a thought on this as well, but it leads well into product because that authenticity thing, I think in an environment like yours, the curation of the right products and the products being, kind of inspiring and meaningful and quality, and we'll come on to it again in a minute, but sustainable as well. All of that matters so much, doesn't it? Because your customer, you were just talking about what customers expect. And frankly, in retail environments that have nothing like the pressure that you do, you're seeing customers in supermarkets now, right, picking up items and looking at the back and looking at ingredients in a way they never did before. Everyone is becoming much more interested in provenance, whether it's food or fashion. Everyone is starting to look at the back of the packet in a way they didn't before. And I think what's interesting about your space, and I'd love to know your experience of this over the last 8 years, it feels like, well, that was probably already happening anyway, because the kind of customers would really expect after this really enlightening educational experience that then these products are really thoughtfully put together and come from good places. And, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, not necessarily just now, but maybe over the years, the challenge of curating good products, but finding good products as well.
I think just to add to that, one thing that I'm always curious about, and I think it's one of the advantages of working within a heritage organisation, is you have so many experts who get excited about things. And when you're bringing a new exhibit on, obviously it opens up a whole new opportunity for ranging. So where does the ideation start? Because you've got some really unique products within your gift stores and things that are developed for each of those exhibits. But what's that kind of creative process, and how much do those experts and those kind of academics get involved with that? Do they brief you? Do they come back? I mean, you said somebody caring about how many feathers were on a dinosaur. It's like, I'd love to have a conversation about that in my day. But how do you enjoy that? And because that's very different to most other retail organisations where it's this, let's look at the data, this has made profit, let's change this to a different shade of green. Whereas you're saying, oh my God, we're bringing a new dinosaur in. How do we bring that to life in retail? And how has that changed?
So I would say, in terms of ideation for like new exhibitions, for instance, like you're saying, that they are really brilliant opportunities to bring in new products for us. And yeah, we do work really closely. So an exhibition, the idea and all the kind of the theming and all the specimens that go into that, the ideation for that will come from like the exhibitions team and the science team. So they'll bring all that together, and then they're kind of letting us know the development of the exhibition and kind of what's going to be in it, what the key objects, what's the really exciting things that are going to be in there from the collections. I mean, a recent one, you talk about new dinosaur, we had Titanosaur not very long ago, for instance, this massive dinosaur in gallery is amazing, really exciting. So from that, obviously, in terms of ideation from that, you are just bringing in loads of really exciting dinosaur products. And Titanosaur wasn't, not one of those dinosaurs particularly been in the market before. So you're creating Titanosaur models and Titanosaur soft toys and Titanosaur, T-shirts with a Titanosaur skeleton on. And yeah, so we're
absolutely all going to go and look at what a Titanosaur looks like after
absolutely,
this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think Jurassic, in the new Jurassic World film, I think they now have a Titanosaur or Titanosaurus, they're calling it, in this new one, which I think that was.
Oh my goodness, that's worked out well.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so we might be able to get the models back out because our exhibition centred. Yeah. But so in those kind of exhibitions, we when they're really family oriented, we have so much experience, years and years and years of experience with the products that perennially do well, and we can usually adapt kind of what those categories are to the new exhibition, so which we can do for those. And then we have other exhibitions like Wildlife Photography of the Year, where that exhibition is more adult focused and in kind of relevant to this discussion, because our customers coming through there are definitely wanting to see more and more of the product. To your point about looking at the back of the packet, where's it coming from? More and more interested in that one about, what's the provenance of this? Why is that? What's the packaging doing on there? Can the packaging be recycled? What kind of good is this product doing? How does it help me? Because they come through. Wildlife photography has lots of messages in and photographs about the impact humans are having on the planet. So you come out of there questioning, into a retail space out of that exhibition. So that's a real tension.
Yeah.
So we now really focus on ranges which they will give customers, well, as well as the photographs being on beautiful paper, which is now more sustainably sourced. So one is all our core ranges. We just look at making sure those are more sustainably sourced. So, it's on FSC paper, it's vegetable inks. We take them, we take the packaging off. We change the formats of products, take magnets off. We do all of that work. So actually a customer coming through still sees the same value in that product and it still looks as beautiful as it did, but it's now almost imperceptibly to them, all the materials on there are, from a much more sustainable source. So that's one thing. And then we also now we bring in ranges which help them help the environment as well. So one interesting one, which was actually recently on Dragon's Den, was this Bevan. I don't know if you've heard of that brand. She's just been on Dragon's Den. She's a really brilliant supplier. And that's literally, it's a little key ring and it's got a little bit of sugar in it. And if you see a bee basically that looks, like it's on its last legs, you can revive it with this item.
Wow.
Yeah. So for instance, that's one, and we, there's lots of other items like that now that we put in our shops and they're really popular with customers. So we're looking at just bringing more and more of that, and we can use those exhibition shops to test what works and then bring it into our kind of main core ranges when things do well.
And you have a huge range. I mean, we talk about kind of our show Source, Home and Gift, where it's literally everything, so many different products. And when we ask people, which certification should we look out for, what audits, which countries, it really varies depending, the regulation and the audits for a toy differ very differently to something that's on printed paper, that's on, key rings or disposables. And it's something generally that I think people struggle with. And obviously you have a great bank of knowledge, but I suspect you've been working in this area for a few years to develop this. So when do you think it started to really be something that consumers were conscious about? And maybe I've got a separate question to that. So I'm always curious what came first, whether or not the museum decided that this was the right thing to do and this fitted with the values, or whether it was consumers actually asking about it and starting to look. I suppose there's a right and a wrong answer, but it's one that I'm always curious about.
So I think the answer, so we definitely went ahead of the actual market and what customers' expectations were. And actually, we started off it wasn't very successful, our first approach to sustainability. So our first approach to doing it in retail was to bring in these products, which were great products, but they were all made from this recycled plastic. They were toys, but they were the look and feel of them wasn't very traditional in terms of toys, but their sustainability credentials were really good. But the price point was high, and they didn't look like, they weren't actually that attractive to children, this range we brought in. So it actually didn't work. And the customers, they weren't really looking massively for sustainability at that point. It wasn't as high on the agenda as we were thinking. And they were too expensive and their children didn't really want them. So
you can make the most sustainable product in the world, but if people won't buy it, it's still going to go the same way.
Exactly. So since we've shifted our strategy then to basically looking at our core ranges, what people want, and basically looking at the materials of those and changing them to become more sustainable. So, and along the way offering the same price points and the same quality. So, for instance, all our soft toys now have a recycled filling, and we won't bring in a soft toy that doesn't have that. And we've turned down some quite commercial opportunities actually in partners because of that. But we're happy to keep that standard because we know that we can very confidently say all our plush has that recycled filling now. And when we have an opportunity to do that with a product, we will.
But I think also that forces suppliers to make changes in their own product lines and in their own developments. And often it's not until a retailer, I think they will be happy to sell a product to somebody at a certain price point. It's not until the person who pays that price point said, actually, this is our priority. Can we make some changes? And I would imagine that you making that as a standard now means that manufacturer has it as standard for all of their other ranges as well. And it's that trickle down kind of change.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. And we do work with some really. The other thing about that is it's made us, when we've kind of re-tendered for suppliers or we've gone out, into the market looking for suppliers, we've made those requirements really really high, as you said, and we make them very clear, and that means we've actually, we've made occasional changes in our supply base for some key ranges because of it.
Yeah.
Or some of our suppliers kind of move ahead of us, and
that's nice.
And sometimes that does happen. And they just kind of bring that standard to us, and we just work with them on, the price point or whatever it is, because we do have lots of families that come to the museum. Families, are often stretched on their budgets. They've got children with them. They want to get them something at the end of the visit, and it's important to us that we can offer products that are
price points.
At different price points, yes, and something which is kind of affordable for families within, with the range we offer.
Yeah.
How much, if anything, are you doing online? How big is the online part of it?
So our online shop is growing. It's not the biggest part of our business currently, but it's something which is it's really growing, and it's actually a bit more focused on. There's other product ranges on there, more like prints and more adult ranges that do well, as well as actually board games, very successful.
Nice, yeah. And how much? So one of the biggest things at the moment I think, among all retailers is, as online grows, stores are, I think rightly, and it's a positive change, becoming a bit more curated, having basically less SKUs and, basically changing from that traditional legacy approach of just having everything in the store, right? Now, I would imagine that isn't at the point for you. What you're doing is slightly different. But is that feeding into anything like this idea of, in your store, not overfilling it, having the right selection of products? I'd be interested in your view on that, because I can imagine, again, a kind of unique challenge in your environment. Because, people come out of that experience, and for a lot of people, there'll be a very specific thing in their mind they want to buy to remember it. So you need to have the range there. But at the same time, I think, generally speaking, from my experience, retail experiences in stores are starting to become better in terms of stores not being overstocked with product. And that's partly because of online, because you go, well, I can buy that stuff online. I want to just get more of a flavour and a feel for the brand. So, yeah, just how does that play out with you in terms of what products you have and how many products you have in the space?
Yeah, so we have done like lots of actual we've done lots of space planning previously. So we literally at one point we just did a CAD plan basically of all our space, all our fixturing, all our kind of linear footage, and then started to plan. Essentially planning our themes and our stories onto the space, and we've kind of essentially kept that now. So we make sure that a story has enough basically room to breathe. So we're not trying to shove too many different themes into the shop. And from that point, it's a bit of test and learn. So one, we did some research with customers to find out what themes around the museum, and we do often, there's regular research the museum does with our visitors, what themes they're most interested in, what are the kind of objects in the museum that they find most interesting, and then we can create ranges which kind of speak to that. And then also we do lots of test and learn. So there'll be things around the museum, there'll be themes that the museum don't necessarily have on show, or things in the collections that aren't on show, like, I don't know, Darwin's Origin of the Species, or, other kind of things like that. And then we know still that there's in the market we can see there's interest in that theme, or we think we can make really strong ranges out of that. So we'll test ranges like that as well. And when they work, we can grow them, and when not, we can move on. But yeah, it is definitely a challenge. But literally, our warehouse is in the building below the shop. So as well as a customer, restriction on that, and like a space restriction in the shops, there's also a warehouse restriction on how much we can actually.
There's an upside and a downside to that. I imagine it means you can kind of move more quickly in some ways. Yeah. But equally, it could be a challenge in some other ways. Yeah. Being above your, the manufacturing. I feel like as well. So and again, a lot of what we've been discussing probably feeds well into this, but. Really interested to hear more about, this kind of collective that you've got that is starting to, and I've forgotten the name of it.
It's okay.
Suzanne, you'll know the name of it because you're better prepared than me always.
Not always, the Heritage Sustainability Group.
Heritage Sustainability Group.
So I loved it when I heard about this, because I think when we talk to buyers or people who look at ranging or people who are genuinely trying to make a bit of a difference in the world of sustainability, from often inside out. So they're inside a business, and it's like, their personal values are they want to start making these products more sustainable. There's nobody really around who can tell them how to do it in a way that doesn't misalign profit priorities, I think is maybe the nice way to put it. And often there isn't really any leaders, I'd say, generally standing out. It's not legislated. A lot of people are doing it for the first time, and going first is never easy, I think, for anyone. So I'm curious, because you founded this group, and what I'd love to know is what started it. What was the one thing, and you just thought, oh my God, what was it that I suppose started that momentum? Because I think this is a really great thing, and hopefully people listening, when they hear a bit more about this, it gives them maybe a bit more confidence to reach out to some people to start something like this. But so where did the spark come from to start with, and how long ago?
I guess it was, but I think just over a year ago, a year and a bit ago. I think kind of I wouldn't say there was one thing I could point to, but there started. So the heritage industry, all the kind of the heritage retail, we're all quite friendly bunch. We all kind of know each other well. We see each other at different events, and so you're kind of chatting about different challenges and things. And sustainability started to be one of those conversations, like particularly like I don't know, plastic taxes coming in, expectation from customers, boards wanting to know what we're doing about sustainability, and everyone started to ask each other questions about, were you still doing plastic bags, or what are you doing about plastic water bottles? Actually think now you've said that, plastic water bottles was one big conversation, everybody emailing each other, are you still doing them, not doing them, what's going on with plastic, is it really better than glass or not, all those kind of, that was a big conversation.
Especially if you've got cafes as well.
Well, exactly, yes, exactly. So yeah, which is another big challenge as well. So we were, you have those conversations, emailing each other about it, and then the museum did had a big strategy about sustainability and people and planet, and we also had a really brilliant sustainability team. So we kind of got a bit of I suppose a bit of momentum at the museum around creating some data around our retail ranges, looking at like our missions, like trying to get to a carbon target. And actually it felt like this would be a really good time just to get the rest of the museum, like the other groups, together and just learn from them and just what everyone was doing, because we were on a journey in a certain way where we were trying to measure materials, and suddenly we kind of got to the point where it's like, when you're making material choices particularly, it's hard to know if you're making a good choice or a bad choice moving from one to the other, because it can have different impacts. I mean, bamboo was a really good example of that in drinkware, and suddenly we all moved towards it, and then you couldn't use it anymore because there's other plastics and things in it that potentially were harmful, so you had to move away. There's a lot of shifting and a lot of decision making we had to do at that time. So out of that uncertainty and us all asking questions, we put that group together so we could just get together and share best practice, and also we wanted to share what were the biggest questions everyone had, so we could get some like other people in to talk to us and give us some advice, other museums maybe we don't normally talk to, or high street experts, and our own sustainability teams who have a load of knowledge as well.
It's fascinating because this is exactly what most retailers are really bad at doing, is basically getting together, like different retailers getting together to tackle things like, I don't know, take problems with high street vacancies. That would be a prime thing for retailers in certain locations to get together and figure out, well, how can we promote this high street so that someone wants to take that space? They never do that. Sustainability ministries have talked about this loads, transparency, sustainability.
So many excuses for lack of collaboration.
Never working together. This is so interesting.
And it's taken the competitive conflict out of it.
Yeah.
Because
you're not seeing, I guess you don't feel like competitors in quite the same way as a retailer. I don't know, maybe that's part of it.
I think heritage we all feel like, I suppose there's always an element of social good to what heritage retail, what we're doing. So you feel like, I think sustainability sits naturally. Like there's the heads of, I obviously kind of started the first meeting, put it together, but it's the heads of retail are brilliant from all these organisations. So it's all of us coming together. And their sustainability leads as well. And it was really because sustainability kind of naturally fits into what we are kind of already are thinking and what we're trying to do. So I guess that may be more of a natural fit for us than some of the high street retailers.
Yeah, and it strikes me that because there's less of a feeling of competition between you, it was easier to just move forward and do that. Me and Suze meet brilliant retail people all the time who will all individually say would love to do this kind of thing when it comes to it.
But we can't.
They don't. Yeah. No, exactly. We can't. Or
I think there's always reasons. There's always a reason not to do something. But ultimately, the reason to do something is that it's often the right thing to do. And it's interesting hearing you talk about materials. It's obviously in the fashion space we talk about materials quite a lot. It's like it's great that it's been sustainably made, but what happens when you're finished with it?
Yeah.
It's like is there a man-made component of it that means actually you can't recycle it anymore? And I can imagine that bamboo conversation was an interesting one. Interestingly, what are you using right now if you're not using bamboo? Have you gone to a different wood stock or?
For drinkware,
Yeah.
we moved away from bamboo. What are we using now? We have
I love an on-the-spot question.
yeah, I know. Yeah, just
because we have garden
centres
centres in our listening base, and often they have cafes as well as large retail areas.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah. We've kind of gone. So, for instance, we just went to water bottles. Where we moved to metal for most of those. For instance, what else have we done in terms of? It was a lot of drinkware that had to move from one to the other. I think mostly we've gone to like aluminium and stainless steel. I think for most of the water bottles now instead of using bamboo.
That's interesting because I always feel like the move to bamboo was because it can be a great material, but it also looks sustainable because it's a woody type material, and people often gravitate towards that in a retail. It's like, well, if it looks like wood, it's got to be a better choice. Whereas actually, a metal bottle will last forever.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, it's funny actually. Again, this is slightly tangential, but among so many mad things that are coming up from the US at the moment, Trump is quite early on said he's going to move back to plastic straws. Paper straws.
I've heard this.
Like a
Bring
PR
back
thing.
plastic straws.
The more interesting thing, that's not surprising, but is how many people have kind of come out going, absolutely, yeah, it's great because you know what, the whole thing's a mess because I've seen bamboo and I've seen aluminium, and what people have said, it's interesting, what people are basically saying is because there's no one clear alternative, therefore why don't we just go back to plastic? Which is a ridiculous argument, but it does tap into, I think a bigger issue here, which is that because, in the real world, and people who are trying to do things properly and do things well, there isn't a clear, there's no silver bullet for any of this. So they're trying out different materials. But because there isn't a silver bullet, because there isn't this is definitely the most sustainable material to use for, drinking containers, then that basically means it's very easy to say, well, we might as well go back to plastic. It's all nonsense. Yeah. That in itself is such a good example of the challenge, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what would make it quite interesting to have that group of other heads of retail. You can say, we've tried this. We're having a nightmare with it. What are you doing?
Exactly.
And I think that type of kind of cross-pollination of ideas, or even just being able to pick up the phone is something that you're quite fortunate to have, because although retail is kind of a small world when it comes to some of the multiples and people move around those, I don't know how many people talk in detail about shop. It's like, let's talk what's happening here. It's like, what are you doing? I think there's almost that commercial wall that is almost stopping people having those conversations unless they divulge something. Whereas actually, in the sustainability space, there isn't really any right answers at the moment. People are just trying to find the best thing. And some of it will work and some of it won't.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would also actually just give a bit of a shout out to we're also a member of the British Retail Consortium, and they have done a really great job in bringing together high street retailers and helping them share knowledge. I've been to, and there are some high street retailers who are like doing such amazing things, and supermarkets actually as well that have kind of you get some really great learnings from them and things they've done. So that's one organisation and they've got quite a few charity members as well as high street, so it's quite a nice blend in that organisation, and they've got a big sustainability strand. So that has been good. I'd definitely recommend that if anyone's
I fully agree.
interested.
BRC are great. I think that's really fair. And then probably I think the only limits to BRC's ability to do stuff is actually just the seniority of some of those retailers that are willing to share specific stuff, and that's nothing. I think BRC would do that more if they could. Yeah. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
So what do you think has been the biggest change for you in terms of sustainability? Has there been any particular, what's your favourite product that you've brought through that's really, I know, there's got to be one, everyone's got one. It's like asking you to choose your favourite child. Yeah. What's been your favourite product that you've brought through on that sustainability front that's actually just sold so well? I'm always curious.
On the system, actually, what I'm most proud of is that we've brought our just main ranges through. So all the tote bags are organic cotton, all the t-shirts are organic cotton, all the plush is recycled filling, which I mentioned. That was a massive thing to do, to turn that round and go to our suppliers and work out pricing and track everything through that you're selling through to get onto the new range and the new base. And we had to find new suppliers for some. It was a big project that. And when we completed it, although if you came into the shop, you probably wouldn't notice as a customer may be the difference. But for us, we through that time, we also got a lot of our supplies onto SEDEX. So that was another big project all at the same time. So that felt really, when we finally did it, and the first spreadsheet was the last plush had been converted and we'd sold the last, I was just like, that was a really nice moment. Yeah.
That last plush, you're out the door.
I know, honestly, it literally was that. I was asking every day at one point, like, have we sold that? That last product line's gone. And obviously my team did an amazing job on that. But yeah, that was a big project for all of us.
What was because I think there's a lot of there's probably quite a lot of retailers who are wanting to go through that journey, because I think it's something to be said that you can make those types of changes and nobody will notice it in store. It's like that you've just managed to keep the quality the same, the price points probably the same as well. It's just fundamentally a better product. When you started that, what was your biggest surprise or your biggest hurdle when you started that? Something that you thought, this will be quite straightforward. It wasn't.
What would be my biggest hurdle of that?
Or biggest surprise or curveball?
I think the biggest, and not to be ungenerous to suppliers, the biggest surprise was how, because we thought we're going to go to our supply base, and of course they're going to be like, this is too difficult for us. Like it's a bit to turn all your products around into this other product in this time frame, and you want to achieve the same price point and you want to have the same quality. Like, you're dreaming, basically, I thought was going to be the response. But I think the biggest surprise was how supportive they were in that change. So that was really, really good. So we were actually, for 2 key ranges, able to keep the same suppliers through that, so that's been really brilliant, and they're still with us, and that's after a few years. So that was a really great surprise. In terms of the challenges of doing that, what would be? I think potentially just getting the momentum in the business behind it, because I had to say for this year, not this year, but my team have to focus on this, which means you're not doing as much profit driving things. You're not looking so much at ranges and changing things over and bringing in new products, and you're kind of saying to the business, we're going to stay looking a little bit the same on some key ranges while we focus on just changing over these materials. But actually, again, I had a lot of buy-in from the business for that, but it just meant it meant going kind of with that message for a business plan for a year, saying for a year I'm going to need to focus on kind of switching over these things. But the museum, another real benefit where I am, it's so focused on planet, sustainability, people thriving, that you get a loads of support. So I'm kind of making it sound like it was really easy. It was really tough.
No, I can imagine getting them on board we're gonna keep things. Obviously, retail's all about newness. Yeah. It's like if it doesn't feel new, then it almost you think cheating the consumers in some way, and you've set a benchmark already so high that it can be quite challenging. And for you, I can imagine you are not the only person who has gone to a business to say, actually, in order for us to make this fundamentally better, we're going to have to not make as much money or not do as much new stuff because we've only got so many people and there's only so many hours in the day. And we're almost going to need to treat it as almost like an incubator, a startup. It's like we need to start from scratch. And actually getting the business to buy into that, whether it's a museum or whether it's a retailer or whether it's a board, it's like that's quite a difficult message because people want to see the money continue to come in and they want to still be able to give that experience. I imagine during that time, you maybe moved the shop around a few times to kind of, I always say that the best way to make people think they're walking to a new place is to move stuff around. Did you, during that period, how did you keep that feeling of newness in those stores when you're working with fundamentally the same ranges? Any tips, tricks?
Well, I think for us, we were concentrating in our core and just keeping everything full. So in terms of, so it was really just about balancing like the new product materially coming in and kind of balancing that with the making sure you were bringing the new thing through at a slightly new price point. We tried to keep it same as much as possible, but there had to be some changes. You kind of have to feed all that in whilst keeping the ranges. So it was more lifting ranges and putting them in, because we've got 3 stores in the museum, like all of this in one, all of this is another, and you're just trying to feed everything through. But then because we do have an exhibition program and we do have that every year, that does help us. At least we keep newness coming in through that program, which we were doing at the same time. So that did help us.
That's good. I think one last question that I'm curious about, and I think it's really about advice that you would give to people who are just starting out on the journey, because I think you've gone through this process of of changing your core ranges, of changing your supplier base, of auditing your supplier base, whilst also getting a business on board to allow you the space to do that. It's quite an intimidating journey for a lot of retailers, a lot of buyers, and even a few heads of sustainability that we've spoken to over the past few years. What advice would you give to somebody just starting off on that process?
Don't be intimidated by the size of it. It's hard not to be, but there's so much. And pick an area you want to make a change in first. Pick something you can do and you can change, and you know it's a change for the better, and get that project done as a start.
Yeah,
I would say that would be my biggest tip.
It sounds like it's just start.
Yeah, exactly. That otherwise you can just be. It's just you'd be paralysed otherwise, just by the amount that you could possibly change. I think know that there isn't a magical answer out there. There's no internationally recognised definition of all the materials and what's better than the other and everything's it does not exist.
No.
So you just have to make some good choices and some changes, some sensible choices. Talk to peers, talk to people access your network or build a network is also really important, and that's what's really helped me. And then use that to just make some good changes, and you can use other retailers and other examples of things people have done that you can then make the change in your own organisation. And once you kind of get the first few projects done, you can start to build some momentum behind it.
Yeah. Jack, do you have any last questions?
I suppose, kind of on that point, advice on some of that kind of product and specifically product and range stuff. Do you? Again, think about the rest of retail, and again, with your experience in Waterstones and anywhere else, do you feel like one of the big trends there is that I feel like brands are constantly, if they're retailers and they sell multiple products and work with multiple suppliers like you do, they're looking at different ways of learning from what's selling, basically, and then feeding those insights into, normally they'll go to kind of an own label model, right? That's the classic thing, and they'll go, right, this is working well, and we'll learn from those insights, and when we produce our own stuff, we'll do that maybe a bit even better, and then you have higher margin, and that seems to be that's been a retail trend for as long as I've seen it, but it's even more relevant today when margins are small for most retailers. How does that kind of trend play out with you guys? How do you use some of those insights from what's selling and what you're learning from different suppliers, different retail, into some maybe new product categories? How do you use those learnings effectively, and how important is that information as well?
In terms of when we bringing in new categories and trying things, we usually try out categories by bringing in off the shelf first, and that will help us kind of test out formats and materials. And then kind of as you, there's kind of two ways we can go with that. Sometimes the supplier we're bringing in is so out there in the sustainability space. It's not something we could replicate by doing an own label. So we'll do that as more of maybe a partnership or a co-brand or something with them. Like Ocean Bottle, we haven't done a co-brand with Ocean Bottle, but that's a good example of a retailer where we do sell them in the museum, but the work they do is so, amazing. We couldn't do that work. We'd work with them to potentially, create something or sell their product, which we do. And Waterhall is another good example of a brand where we do that. We sell their brand and they've got brilliant products. Otherwise, we'll bring in new formats of sustainable products, sustainable materials. What's a good example of that? Where we've co-branded, where we've kind of branded our own. Trying to think of something now that's relevant. On the spot. But no, I think with other categories, all I can think of at the moment is, for instance, water bottles. So when we moved from bamboo, we moved into then stainless steel, and we brought in a lot of different formats of higher price points, which we were a bit nervous about. So we wanted to bring in something. We don't higher price points. Sometimes we feel they can be a bit challenging for us in the museum, depending on kind of the product and the quality. But we tried out those kind of that format of water bottle. It worked really well for us, and then we're kind of bringing in the co-branded versions, which are in exactly that same format now. So I think we're always testing, we're always learning, and when a product really flies off the shelf, we will then bring in exactly our own ranges.
Yeah, I love it. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
it's a good way to start.
Yeah, exactly.
Great, and I think that's the key message here, is just to start, whether it's sustainability programs, whether it is trying to make significant changes. We always try to end with something we've learnt. I think what I've learned is a new dinosaur, alongside the sensible importance of having a peer-to-peer network. Like, even if it doesn't exist, I think the one thing I've learned within retail is on a personal level, people will help people. But until somebody starts reaching out to say, actually, we're having a bit of a challenge with this, it's like, what are you guys doing? I think those informal networks are so important. And I think as we try to move more sustainably into better products, better ranges, better materials, you're right. I think one of the key takeaways, there is no magic list of this is the best material to use. You've just got to make the best decisions for what you think is the right thing at the time. And that you actually have to start making those decisions somewhere. And I think that's a really key point, is just even like, don't get over intimidated with the size of a task. You've got to start somewhere. Jack, I don't know if you've got any.
Yeah, I think for me, the fact that, I work with lots of different retailers, actually this is kind of really made me think that the retail industry as a whole should spend a bit more time actually looking at the experience and learnings from heritage and cultural retail. Because in a sense, you have to work a little bit harder than a lot of retailers and a lot of industries. You have no choice because of the very nature of what you do, because it really does matter. And you can't take it lightly. And as we were talking about earlier, commerciality in itself can feel slightly sensitive in a historic cultural institution. So it's really made me think is actually they're probably fantastic places for retailers, anyone listening to this, to go and, kind of look at those experiences, because they probably are slightly different really to almost anything else, and a really great place to get inspiration from. Whatever industry you're in, and which is really interesting for me. I think I'll think about that more, when I'm taking people to spaces. Actually, let's not forget that these are very different spaces and there's stuff to learn from them.
It's great. Well, Claire, thank you so much for joining us and talking to us about some of the work that you do. As I mentioned it before, I do love your museum shop. I am a fan. And I'm sure there are many parents who like going through there as well. So thank you so much for spending the time with us and sharing a little bit of your insight as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Thanks, Claire.